Hello and welcome everyone to the third episode of the Ace Tennis Podcast. I am Avyukt and this is the Doon School's first ever tennis podcast. In this episode, we shall analyze the second week of this year's championships at Wimbledon, and I shall be accompanied in doing so by the senior members of the Doon School's tennis team, my batchmate Archit at Tata House, and a fellow Kashmir House as former Gurmeher Bedi. So let's start by discussing the lady singles side of the tournament. And Archit, take us through the second week.
Yeah. So, like we discussed earlier, the top 10 really didn't perform that well this time, which meant that a lot of new players would be playing the later half of the Wimbledon this year. In fact, the final eight were featuring six new players who were playing the quarterfinals for the first time. And this is an open era record. So, that is something that was really interesting for me. To be more specific, I think some interesting matches were Ashley Barty versus Aila Tomianovic. So it's been 41 years since two Australian women have met in the Grand Slam quarterfinals. And Ashley Barty won that match 6-1, 6-3 in straight sets, eventually being crowned the champion. And as I talked about, uh, six new players playing the quarterfinals for the first time, we had some really interesting new come-ups, such as Emma Raducanu, the 18-year-old from UK. Unfortunately, she had to retire due to, I believe, breathing problems.
Yeah.
And talking about the semifinals and the finals, Caroline Pliskova beating Aryna Sabalenka in a three-setter. And I really think that she used her height to her advantage in that match because she was serving really, really well in that semifinals. Unfortunately, she didn't really perform well in the finals, I think, because Ashley Barty, the powerhouse she is, that backhand slice was magnificent because she was going
Yeah, it's always the
so deep.
danger on grass.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Ashley Barty just dominated the entire tournament this year, and I'm expecting some great results from her in the US Open as well.
Yeah, so Bedi, your views?
Yeah, I think that is completely true in terms of the fact that a lot of the top players who I expected to like make it to like at least the second week dropped out. So, for instance, like Simona Halep had to withdraw due to her calf injury, and similarly, Serena Williams lost her first round match. And this is actually one of the first, Wimbledon finals that neither of the two Williams sisters were in the finals since like 2014. So that does show that there is like sort of a change happening, and the mantle is being passed down. And as like Archit already said that there were completely new players in this year's top eight, and I don't see that happening so much in the men's, but it's very encouraging to see that new players are actually coming up in the women's draw, and it's not being dominated by the same players repetitively. And I think that is something which we need to look out for, going into the US Open, and in next year's in tournaments as well. Another thing which I was thinking of was that a lot of the first week was dominated by conditions. So like for instance, the court was slippery on a lot of occasions. So I thought that like really played a crucial role in like determining who was playing well and who wasn't, because whoever I think was able to adapt after the French Open, the clay court of the French Open and coming into Wimbledon, which is like just 2 weeks after the French Open, I think that played a really crucial role. And I think that is something which younger players are really doing well, and these old timers have trouble doing, simply because of their age. It takes some time to adapt, takes their body to adapt, take time for their
Definitely.
body to adapt, and that is something which these younger players are able to do really well. And that is why I think that so many new players were able to actually come up in this year's Wimbledon finals, and the entire tournament.
Yeah, so of course you spoke about the conditions being really taking a toll on many players, and that's true. We discussed that in our previous episode with Radhya. And I think this year, like Archit mentioned, Ash Barty's slice is always a danger on any surface, but more so on grass, especially in the second week when the grass looked more like the traditional grass with the ball skidding more onto the court and not just bouncing off. So Ash Barty really thrived on that, and of course her backhand slice is one of the best in the ladies side in the WTA tour and probably second after Federer's in the entire game. And yeah, that was quite a weapon for her, and that will be a dangerous weapon in her arsenal going into the US Open. Although I suspect with the ball fluffing up early in US and Australian Open, especially in US because of the conditions there, how much of a threat that will be remains to be seen. But yeah, Bharti will be the one to look out for in the next Grand Slam for sure. As far as Pliskova is concerned, I really like her game style because it's ultra aggressive. She's tall. She has a good first serve. She has a good serve, and that helped her come back in the second set. And after the first 3 or 4 opening games in the first set, it really looked like one-way traffic in the finals. But she gave us a match. She gave the fans a match, and I think she deserves a massive respect, and I think she's also one to look out for. And Sabalenka, the youngster, 23-year-old, I was really impressed by her tournament. I think we can expect great things from her. Although I think all of them will be playing second fiddle in the years to come to Naomi Osaka, who really in many ways seems like the second coming of Serena Williams. And yeah,
And
so
even going into
as
the
far as the ladies,
yeah, sorry. So going into the
yeah, continue.
we do have quite some time. So I think Simona Halep, Naomi Osaka, I think they should be back for the US Open. So it's going to be much more competitive for Ashley Barty if she's hoping to clutch that title up as well.
Yeah.
And they have a couple of hardcore tournaments to play before the US Open. So it's not going to be easy for Ashley Barty or for any other player. So I think this US Open is going to be much more competitive simply because we had so many players drop out in the Wimbledon. And I'm really looking forward to the US Open this year. And now, moving on to the gentlemen's single draw of Wimbledon. I think we witnessed a lot of five-set thrillers in the fourth round and the quarterfinals. You know, we had Karen Khachanov prevailing against Sebastian Korda in a extremely interesting five-set match. The fifth set score was 10-8, and we witnessed a lot of service breaks in that game. It was just hilarious. And then
It was like a match between you and I, Archit.
Exactly. And then we had Martin Fuchsowicz finally beating Andrei Rublev after 4 previous losses in the ATP 500 tour, and he finally got to beat Rublev. So I think that's a major confidence boost for him. We had Novak Djokovic, you know, a very easy match for him against Christian Garin. I don't even know what Garin was doing there. I mean, he couldn't even put the ball in. Like that was 2-3 points, and then the ball was flying out or was hitting the net. Then in the quarterfinals, we saw Matteo Berrettini beat the Canadian star Felix Auger-Aliassime in a fourth set match. And unfortunately, we had Hubert Hurkacz beating the Wimbledon legend Roger Federer. So we have the biggest Federer fan here. I think he would like to talk about what happened in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, so you asked me what happened, and what happened was really plain and simple. Hurkacz mentally and physically dominated Federer, who really just didn't look up for it. And I must tell you all that I cried for half an hour straight after the match, and it really took me some consoling by my family after when I started crying because this was potentially the last time we've seen him. I hope it's not, and I do think that for all the hype it's getting, I think it's not going to be the last time we see him on center court. So because it's not possible that the greatest story ever told in tennis history gets over with the hero being bageled on his favorite court. So yeah, that's that. And but Federer really didn't look up for it. His forehand, especially in the third set, and in general across the 3 sets, was really not up for it. His serve percentage was really low. Second serves were very slow, and Hurkacz really has a good backhand, so Federer couldn't really target that area as well. It was a very well-rounded, great overall performance by Hurkacz. He wasn't phenomenal in one department, and yeah, that just showed that Hurkacz is better.
And what do you think, Bedi? What do you think about the quarterfinals and then moving on into the semis?
I think that like much like the first week of Wimbledon, the second week to an extent was also dominated by conditions. Not so much the grass, because I think that the grass, for the first 2 days we've always seen that it's slightly slippery and more difficult to play. But like in the second week, I think it was more about the sort of environment which they were playing in, which means that it wasn't that hot and like it wasn't that warm. And I think that that really dominated, that really impacted the play, because I mean, if you look at players like Federer, they like to come out of the blocks aggressively, and even though that and grass is his favorite surface, and he does really well because he can play those sort of flat and fast shots, which we've seen him play in the past. But I think that this time he was not able to do those, and like a lot of players, I think, had trouble. Especially people who like to hit those fast shots, they had some trouble because the air was simply not warm enough, and I think that that really impacted not just Federer's but other people's ability to play, and that is why I think we had these incredible five setters, because in matches where we thought that if one person would be winning hands down, I think that there were five setters because of these conditions. And then moving on to like sort of the semi-finals and the finals, I think that although like Djokovic was the only big three to reach the semi-finals this time, I think that there still needs to be a lot of work done by these other players. What do you guys think about that?
Yep, and in the second week we also had the center court, and I think the entire championships operating at 100% capacity, which included having a full house at the center court. So the interesting semifinals for me was between Novak Djokovic and Denis Shapovalov, and that was a straight set win for Djokovic. But he himself talked about how Denis was the better player in the first two sets, and that the scoreline doesn't always tell you how good a player has played. Because again, I think Shapovalov was in control of the match in the first two sets, especially, but he wasn't converting those crucial points. That's where Djokovic dominated him, and I think that is why he won that match very, smoothly. And he went. The third set was just, it was 7-5, but I still feel that Shapovalov wasn't at the top of his game that day. And
Yeah, he was
I mean, what do you
mentally
think about this,
broken
Avyukt, the semifinals?
Yeah, Shapovalov was mentally broken when he lost the second set, pretty much like Federer was when he lost to Hurkacz in the quarters. But that's a different story. Yeah, Shapovalov, I think, won more points in the first two sets than Djokovic, and
Exactly.
still ended up losing the first two sets, which is the beauty of tennis and its scoring system, and which makes tennis unique. But yeah, Shapovalov, definitely, we expect great things from him in the future. He's improved a lot, probably the most improved amongst the next gen this year, barring probably
Yep.
Hurkacz, who also grabbed the ATP 1000 at Miami or Indian Wells. So
Yes. Yes.
so so Shapovalov has really improved. He's matured. I think that's one area. And now moving on to the second semi-final, I was expecting more from Hurkacz, but I think he wasn't up for it. And fatigue finally took a toll on him, especially since he played Medvedev 2 days in a row and then Federer. And then, of course, the emotional drain and, the how overwhelmed he felt after beating his idol on center court and bagling him in the last set. So I think that took a mental toll on him as well. So yeah, Hurkacz really didn't seem up for it, even though he took the third set, which really came out of nowhere and it was completely random. So yeah, it set up what I thought would be an interesting finals, but what ended up being a disappointing and personally the second worst finals I've seen in terms of quality of tennis after Thiem versus Zverev in the 2020 US Open. But that was still understandable because it was both of theirs first real shot at a Grand Slam, and probably out of the next gen, them two have looked the most threatening. So yeah, this was very poor in terms of Grand Slam tennis quality, but nevertheless, it was really fascinating because of the matchup. What do you think, Vedi?
Yeah, I think that that is true that in terms of the final especially, I think that the quality was quite poor, and not just from one player. I think that both the players weren't at the top of their game,
Yeah,
and Djokovic especially. I think that we've seen him play far better than what he's playing currently, and Berrettini should really have taken advantage of that fact. We saw in the first set that although Berrettini won, and like we already said that in tennis, even if you're even if you like end up winning more points or playing better, you might end up losing the game, you losing that particular set. I think a similar sort of thing happened where Djokovic, I think, was slightly better in, especially in the first half of the first set, when he was leading 5-2. But then Berrettini did come back and he started playing, slightly differently, and those unforced errors which were really hampering his game really came down towards his latter half of the first set. But I think that at the end of the day, neither of the two players were at the top of the game. Berrettini had a wonderful opportunity because Djokovic simply wasn't at the top of his game. We've seen him shaky throughout this entire tournament, and all some may say that Djokovic doesn't need to be at his best or to face a player like Berrettini. But I still think that that itself should give Berrettini that drive, and I think that that drive is lacking, especially after the first set, where I really don't think that Berrettini will believe that he would be able to see it through. Maybe you could argue that it's because of Djokovic's mental rigor, or maybe because he's a better player. That is up for debate. But I think that on that particular day, Djokovic wasn't at the top of his game, and Berrettini, could have played far better and should have taken, advantage of that opportunity. Which, I mean, I don't know when will that opportunity
yeah,
come.
I just feel that the nerves of the big final were a big factor for Berrettini because he's a big server. He serves really well. He was serving very fast. And I think that's the only thing he was doing good that day. Still, we didn't see him serve in volley. He was hitting some good inside out shots, never approached the net. And I think, Bedi, you already mentioned this. There were way too many unforced errors from both the players, but I think slightly a bit more from Berrettini, which exactly we see Djokovic winning the match eventually. And I think a lot of it was about consistency for Djokovic, keeping the ball in, whether it's a good shot or a bad shot. He was just keeping the ball in. And Berrettini had a lot of chances in the first set, even in the second set, to break Djokovic, get that lead, build that momentum for himself, but he just failed to do so. I mean, I think these are the things that the next gen really need to work upon, using themselves in those key moments that eventually decide the winner of the match. And, after this tournament, we have the big three now tied at 20 Grand Slams each, with Djokovic going forward into the US Open, hoping to get the calendar Grand Slam. And I'm really looking forward to the US Open this year.
Yeah, yeah, before we move on to that, I think it's important to highlight that the match was won and lost in one specific area, and that is the serve. And funnily enough, not Berrettini's serve for once, both of their serves, and for different reasons. And that is that Berrettini usually dominates his first serve, and his greatest asset is his 1+2 with his forehand, the serve and the follow up forehand. And that really didn't work out today because when he hit his first serve, that on his serves, the so we can categorize that into four parts: his first serve and his second serve, and then his first serve he hits a backhand follow up, and when he hits a forehand follow up, so that's two parts. And on his second serve, when he hits a forehand or a backhand follow up, and in these four scenarios, the only winning, the 50% or higher winning rate Berrettini had was his first serve forehand backup, which was the highest. He played 40 points on it, which was the maximum. But that really didn't make a difference because it was only 55%, which is not very high. It's slightly above half, and which is frankly what we expect from a big server. And yeah, that is a pattern that you really have to dominate. So the only players who have a win loss record against Djokovic in today's day and age are Kyrgios, Ivo Karlovic, and Taro Daniels, and a couple of others. And the common pattern amongst all of them is that all of them are big servers, and Berrettini had that. So yeah, he won only 55% of the forehand +1 follow up, 35% of his backhand first serve follow up, 30% of his forehand second serve follow up, and 33% of his backhand second serve follow up, which is really less. If you aren't winning more points on your serve, then you're going to lose the match. And in terms of Djokovic serve, I think everyone highlighted the fact that Djokovic was serving slower, but that I think was part of his game plan going into the final, because he took the pace off, especially on the ad court, and served it out wide. So for the people who don't watch tennis very frequently, they must know that I spoke about Kyrgios. So Kyrgios and Berrettini's greatest weapon are their serves and their forehand, and the backhand is average, and Berrettini is slightly below average. So they thrive on the pace they get on the backhand and merely redirect the backhands. So what Djokovic smartly did, and what his game plan was that he took pace off slightly 6 miles per hour less than his tournament average, and he served it out wide, offering Berrettini no pace on his backhand and asking him to generate the pace on his weakest shot, which proved to be fatal for Berrettini and eventually essentially sealed his fate. So yeah, and in terms of Djokovic's return, and we all know that Djokovic is the best returner there has ever been. So yeah, he really neutralized Berrettini serve, and did damage control. And what's important to highlight here is that only 14% of Djokovic's returns were on Berrettini's forehand side, which is staggeringly less. And all of those 14%, to make it more amazing, were Berrettini's first serves, which are 240 over 140 miles per hour, which Djokovic could hardly do anything about. So 14% was only that. 51% of the receives were on Berrettini's backhand side, which is staggering, which is absolutely, I think it's the ideal way to play a tennis match. You target your opponent's backhand, which is for majority of the players that their weakest side. So yeah, in terms of analysis, that really sealed Berrettini's fate. And I
Yep,
think
I
more
think you
than that,
really, yeah. No, so you really summed up all the stats and the figures, which are in retrospect a very important aspect of the game. I think that's how a lot of these players try to improve their game as well, looking at all these stats. And you talked about targeting your backhand is such a key weapon for every player in tennis. And Berrettini was trying to do that, but he wasn't converting any of those forehands that he was trying to hit down the line. They were all going
yeah,
below the net or they were going out. So I think again, that's something that all of these next gen players need to work on, converting in these crucial moments, because
yeah.
this will eventually decide how the match turns out for you. So then I think that's it for today's episode, guys. Thank you for watching and stay tuned in.